Nigeria is set to hold elections this month, so what's at stake? And will Africa's largest democracy and economy elect more women into senior political roles? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the programme. I'm Tom McRae. 93 million people are registered to vote in Nigeria's election on February the 25th. The country is the most populous in Africa. It also has the continent's largest economy and is its top oil producer. But with rising inflation, high unemployment and insecurity in the northeast, a lot is at stake. 18 candidates are running for president, including one woman. Well, the front-runners in the presidential race are the former governor of Lagos State, 70-year-old Bola Ahmed Tinubu. He's with the All Progressives Congress. 76-year-old former Vice President Atiku Abubakar is part of the main opposition party, the People's Democratic Party. Well, then there's wealthy businessman and the former governor of Anambra State, 61-year-old Peter Obi of the Labour Party. And the one woman in the race is Chichi Oje from the Allied People's Movement. But she's not the only woman running for a powerful position in Nigerian politics. One female candidate in the Conservative North is raising expectations that she could be the country's first elected state governor. Activists say if she wins, it could mark a turning point for women in a male-dominated society. We'll get to our guests in a moment, but first, Ahmed Idris has this report from the eastern city of Yola.
This is a moment female activists in Nigeria have worked for. A woman from a major political party becoming a candidate for governor. And she is a frontrunner. Aisha Binani overcame religious and cultural barriers in the patriarchal society to get here. She says it's been worth the struggle.
It gives women, it gives our daughters, it gives our sisters, our aunties, our mothers the confidence that yes, women can work towards occupying whatever elective position they desire.
Although women make up half of Nigeria's population, they've long been on the fringes, economically and politically.
We know also by virtue of the level of education, particularly in this part of the country, the women have been at the disadvantage compared to men.
But activists say changing attitudes and their strength in numbers could work for them this time.
It's really time for women, and we don't want to miss this opportunity. We don't know when we'll get this opportunity again.
Nigeria's general election later this month is being keenly contested and closely watched.
Women activists across Nigeria are upbeat the election of a female could end decades of the exclusion from that office. If that happens, they say, the presidency could be within reach.
The outcome of the vote won't be known for weeks. But for now, her supporters are celebrating what they have already achieved and say momentum is on their side. Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera, Yola.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our guests now. In Abuja, Nigeria, is Idayat Hassan, Director of the Centre for Democracy and Development, a policy advocacy and research organisation focusing on development in West Africa. In London is Annie Olaloku Teriba, political analyst and specialist on politicised ethnicities in West Africa. And in Washington, D.C. is Amaka Anku, Head of Africa Practice at Eurasia Group. A warm welcome to you all. Thank you very much for being on Inside Story. First of all, I just want to acknowledge what a remarkable panel we have today. We're speaking with three Nigerian women about women in Nigerian politics. Annie, if I can start with you first, how significant is that? Would we have even been having this conversation a few years ago, do you think?
Certainly not. I mean, I think the struggle to get access for women into Nigerian politics has been an ongoing one. Last year, we saw occupations of the National Assembly by women after the National Assembly rejected a bill for a minimum of 35% of women. But I definitely think that this year we're seeing some palpable developments, not least the election campaign of Aishatu Banani. So certainly a conversation like this on a stage like this is of significance.
Oh, well, thank you for all being on Inside Story. Idayat, can we just speak about what it would mean to finally have a woman in a powerful position in Nigeria? How significant and symbolic would it be to have a woman elected for the first time?
I think it will be quite an exciting time. It will be inspiring, for especially the young women, the children, the girl child in a country with a very huge number of girl child and even women, but who are very marginalized, both politically, economically, and socially. Like this will be like a new beginning, and the beginning of this feeling of euphoria and expectation that the sky is just the beginning is what people will eventually feel if she comes to become the governor.
Amaka, what chance do you give of a woman being elected in this election?
Look, it's really hard to tell. I think it's a close race. Binani has a lot of support from powerful families in the state. And as you know, she's not the first lady to try on a major party candidate ticket. So it is a close race. I think her chances somewhat depend perhaps on whether the presidential candidate of her party wins, because incumbency in Nigeria is a powerful thing, right? So the incumbent governor will have the advantages of incumbency, but it's a close race, and she's gaining a lot of momentum. So I would say maybe it's about 50-50 right now.
Annie, I see you nodding along there. What chance do you give of Banani winning, and what do you think that she needs to do specifically to get over the line?
Absolutely. So it's a difficult question to answer, so that's why I was nodding. In that we've got a three-horse race for the presidential election at the moment, and so everything is kind of up in the air. But certainly, Amaka was right to point out that having support. So Nigeria has historically been a two-party state. We've got the APC and the PDP, all progressive Congress backing Aishatu, and having that kind of party machine behind you really can make the difference in an election like this.
We'll be keeping a very close eye on her race specifically, I'm sure. Idayat, Nigeria ranks extremely low in gender equality index ratings. You know, women are massively underrepresented when it comes to politics in Nigeria. Can you explain why that is and why it has been such a problem for, so long?
I think a lot of challenges are actually responsible for this. When you look at the current electoral cycle, there are 28 governorship seats up for grab, and you have more than 400 candidates vying for this. And out of this, you just have 25 women, with one being on one of the dominant parties' tickets. It tells you the 24 others are just vying because of the lack of structure. A lot of things are quite responsible for this. I think one and very important is the role money plays in politics in Nigeria. And the fact that women already are marginalized economically, they do not necessarily have the war chest to vie in the elections. Religion is also a very important one, and this religion is one of the factors that might actually impact Binani's emergence as the governor. It is believed that a woman cannot lead a prayer. So how do you expect if Binani, for instance, emerges? How do the traditional authorities stand up? Do they have to stand up when they meet with her? What will that be? It's easy to do that for a man. How will it be actually for a woman? So the role of religion and culture are quite important. But most important is the fact that they never get the opportunity to vie on the platform of the dominant parties. So that takes them out automatically, because vying on the dominant party's ticket means that they have the structure available to them. They have the money, they have all kinds of financial resources, human resources, that gives them the opportunity to traverse all parts of the state or country to win the votes.
Amaka, how do we change that then? How does that change, maybe not in this election, but in elections down the track?
Big question. But let me just come in 1 second on something Hassan was saying, which is it's quite fascinating that in Nigeria, the Northeast, which is a part of the country that people typically associate with women being sort of more underrepresented or sort of more subjugated, quote unquote, because of religion, actually is one of the most dynamic places so far in terms of women in politics, right? Like they have the second highest representation in parliament, second to Southwest, more than other parts of the South. And the two women who have vied on major political party tickets have come from the Northeast, right? So I just think it's interesting, it's fascinating to think about the role of religion, but also to see, you know, how that's played out in Nigeria. What will change it? Look, I think things like this take us in the right direction. I think people like Binani coming out, whether she wins or not, right? By the time, you know, this is the second time that we've had a major run for governorship by a woman on a major party ticket. If she wins, it will break the glass ceiling and it will start to change the narrative.
Annie, do you think that there needs to be a quota to get more women into politics? Do you think that would be a positive for Nigeria?
So a lot of Western countries have kind of formally or informally taken that approach. I'm not so sure when you're trying to build a sense of faith in women's leadership that in a country like Nigeria, it will necessarily be effective without at least some caveats. But ultimately, I do think also part of the move towards equality and parity and representation is women also having the opportunity to fail. You know, Nigeria's had many failed governors, and that is never taken as a test of their leadership, right? So a test of their gender's capacity to lead. And so I think we do ultimately need more numbers in, and we need parties to make commitments to supporting the talent from women within the party, whether that's at the Senate level or in the legislature, or whether that's at the governorship level and executive power. And then you can start to build a funnel for women into the top positions. So I think less so about having quotas in the here and now, but more so about actually building the infrastructure for supporting and cultivating women's talent.
Idayat, you were just speaking earlier about some of the religious and cultural barriers that women in politics come up against. What do you think are some of the remedies to those? How do women in Nigeria overcome those, do you think?
I think it's really going to be more about messaging, and it's really about putting out the right narrative in the public domain to show that in Nigeria, historically, women have participated in the political process, either from the ancient or your empire, even the Lagos, are the same in the Zaria Kaduna states, which is one of the bedrock of politics. Sokoto, like all the core Muslim states, in fact, in northern Nigeria, have had very strong women who were there pre-colonial era and even during this colonial era. And there is nothing in the Quran which actually completely forbids women from actually participating in politics. We've seen the role of the wife of the Prophet himself, Aisha, and how she played a very huge role in his life, and even in the jihad, in the Islamic jihad. So what is currently happening is putting those kind of narrative, and that is what is being done with the Binani campaign, so that we can change the hearts and mind of the people.
Amaka, seeing women in power in a powerful political position, what do you think that would do for the next generation of young girls and young women in Nigeria? I mean, being able to have someone to look up to, what would that do for the younger women in Nigeria?
I think it sends a clear message that the sky is the limit for everyone, whether you're a male or female, right? I think it creates inspiration. I think it would create more opportunity. It changes perceptions of societies in terms of how women are treated in the workplaces. I do think it has an intangible impact. And that's why I have a slightly different view on quotas, right? Whether you want to call it quotas or encouragement. I think that if you look around Africa, the countries that have some sort of guidance, you know, I know a lot of people don't like the word quotas. I don't like the word quota too, but the countries that have showed an intentionality around increasing women's participation, whether it's through laws or regulations or guidelines, are doing way better than Nigeria. South Africa has they're almost half of their parliament is women, right? They have, internal rules within the party and as well as national laws. In Kenya, there are laws. They're not meeting those laws, but they're way better than Nigeria in terms of representation. Over 20% of the parliament is female, and several more governors. Rwanda has those kinds of rules. Senegal has those kinds of rules. All of them are doing way better, right? So I do think you kind of have to push initially to get those numbers and then let the intangible effects take you across the line.
Okay, just moving on from female candidates to female voters, are any of the main political parties or presidential candidates actually trying to engage with female voters? Are they pitching policy specifically towards women? Annie, I'll throw that over to you.
No worries. So had a look at the manifestos. There is certainly quite a bit in a couple of the manifestos about maternal health, which is a really big issue for Nigeria and preventing maternal death. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that any candidates made any significant commitment to improving women's access to kind of positions of seniority within society, whether that's in the private or the public sphere. But ultimately, I think that in an election like this, where there are already so many different dynamics, you have a situation whereby marginally there are more men registered to vote than there are women in Nigeria. And you also have a situation where people have competing interests, right? It's understandable that hasn't been the front and center of this campaign. However, I think the role of civil society organizations, women ourselves as well, is to push candidates actually to start speaking in specific and detailed terms about what they want to do for women. We've had in the last 5 years a number of women appointed to C-suite positions, to leadership in private companies. And if that's not translating into the public sector and that's not translating into politics, then we really, as a country, have not much to show for it.
Idayat, much has been made about this election specifically, that there's a huge amount on the line. Can you explain what is at stake for Nigeria here?
I think a lot is at stake, really, because you cannot be for us without us. One, when it comes to the issue of women, you are talking in terms of like 48% of the registered voters actually being women, and the women representation is quite dismal in these elections, with projections that it might, at the end of the elections, we might have just a total of 3 or 4% maximum representation. So a lot is really at stake. Getting some of those seats and getting the representation is very important. And it's also important because at this point in the life of the country, the question of inclusion keeps coming and popping up at every point in time. So we are talking not just inclusion of gender, we are talking about the inclusion of young people. Ethnicity and religion are asking to be represented. The best way you can do it is when you can fine-tune all this and you have an answer that with every segment of society included in the whole electoral system.
Right. Amaka, I mean, do you think unemployment and the cost of living, inflation, the shortage of banknotes even, I mean, is that leading to a greater engagement because it's actually impacting people's everyday life, their wallets? Do you think that is what has gotten more people engaged in this election?
I don't think it's the banknotes. Well, it's hard to tell how sort of the most proximate, the most recent issues will impact the election, because it could well make some people not be able to afford to travel to election, right? So it's hard to tell. I think the bigger driver is just decades of underinvestment in Nigerians, in public health care, in infrastructure, in roads, and people are disillusioned with the establishment, right? People are disillusioned with what both political parties represent, right? So I think there's a high level of, it's been a while since we've been doing this democracy, right? It's been a while, over 20 years, and it's time for the democracy to deliver some dividends, right? Beyond elections, right? So I think there's a high level of frustration. I think it's great. We'll see. I hope that the turnout is higher than we've seen in previous years, because I think that will send a strong signal to the political elite.
Do you think, Annie, that there will be pushback on the political elite? Is there a candidate that stands out that can step up against the establishment?
So we're seeing a three-horse race. We've seen a really strong movement emerge around a third candidate, Peter Obi, in this election. Now, Obi came out of the PDP, so that's important to kind of note. But I think that more important than the actual candidates in this election is the political engagement that we're seeing, right? And this can't be seen in isolation. We're going right the way back to Occupy Nigeria, right the way through to, I think the last time I was on here, we were talking about NSAS, right? And so you've got a young population. Nigeria has an incredibly young population who are engaging with politics and making demands of politicians that they hadn't previously done. So I think regardless of what the outcome of the election is, given that party machines are very powerful, it's not clear what the outcome is going to be, there is a really strong sentiment that nothing is going to go back to normal after this election. And if that energy is mobilized into organizations, youth organizations, mobilized into holding whoever wins the election to account, then what we're probably going to see is if the next person fails to do the job in 4 years' time, they're going to get voted out.
Right, yeah. Only get one shot at it. Idayat, in previous elections, there have been claims that, there's been polls that have been rigged, of vote buying. Do you think this time the vote will be free and fair and there's not going to be as much or any corruption?
I think this time around, Nigerians are kind of very energized and they have trust in the electoral system compared to the previous electoral cycle. And lots of reasons are responsible for it. For instance, the introduction of technology such as the bimodal voter accreditation system, BVAS, the INEC result viewing platform, has kind of imbued some confidence in the electoral system, and it's even making people want to turn out to exercise their franchise on that day. But precluding vote buying in these whole elections will be like a very huge dream, because of this new technology, what it also means that the role money will play will actually take a larger than life role, because they do not really know how to interfere with it. The best way you can influence the outcome is actually to buy the vote. But the scarcity of Naira might make it a bit difficult to buy it. But Nigerian politicians are very adaptive and responsive.
Well, I know we at Al Jazeera will be keeping a very close eye on how the election does play out. Just to broaden it out even further, Mark, this election does have wider ramifications, doesn't it? Nigeria being one of the largest democracies in the world has consequences for elsewhere in West Africa. So how important is it in terms of setting an example of how a strong democratic country looks like and what can be done?
That's a lot of responsibility, but I do think it is important. Kenya, which is a much smaller economy, also had a very close election last August. The opposition candidate, who was actually the incumbent deputy president, right? It was quite a fascinating race, won, but it was very close. And so but it was seen as an example of what democracy should be, right? It was close. The losing candidate conceded, left. It was largely peaceful. It was mostly run on issues, right? So I do think Nigeria, the most populous country in Africa, the largest Black nation in the world, and if we can get this election to be seen as credible, I think Nigerians have the highest level of trust in the electoral process today, in my view, than they've had since 1999, in part because of the changes Idayat was just explaining. And so but I think what's important is what happens after the election. Now, in a very close competitive three-horse race, the electorate is divided, right? There's going to be a big chunk of people who feel cheated in one way or the other because they didn't win. And it's very important what the media does. It's very important what civil society does. It's become a favorite tactic of politicians to impugn the credibility of electoral processes as a political tactic to keep their base energized. It's very important that Nigerian civil society and media does not let that happen in this election. As long as if Nigerian elections will not be perfect, there will be some incidences of violence. There will be some incidences of whether it's intentional or unintentional errors on the reform sheet. But as long as there is a general sense of, people are being able to vote freely in the way they want, it's very important for the rhetoric for leaders, not just the politicians, but the media and the civil society, to lift up and reinforce the credibility of the process.
Annie, just very quickly, because we've only got a minute or so left, but how hopeful are you that these elections will be run in a fair and non-violent way, especially in the aftermath, like Amaka was saying, with 3 really close candidates?
Yeah, certainly. I think I'm very trusting of the new changes. So in addition to the BVAS, we've also got a new Electoral Act, which is much stronger on malpractice. And we've already seen that in action where you've had an election nullified in Osun State. But I think it really does hang in the balance, right? When you have people who are fully committed to a different Nigeria, who believe genuinely that whichever candidate that they're supporting is the best choice for Nigerians, and who maybe are fed information which undermines the credibility of the election, you have all of the seeds that you need for incitement of violence, right? And so there is a really heavy responsibility on everybody who is speaking about the elections, who's participating in the elections, not to stoke that up. I do think, however, that Nigerians, after a really long period of underinvestment, are tired. I think we're tired of fighting, right? And I think that whatever happens or whatever is the outcome of the election, if everybody plays the role that they're supposed to, that people will be, regardless of which candidate wins, ready to get the ball rolling and ready to move forward.
Thank you so much. Like you say, there is a huge responsibility and a lot at stake riding on this election. Thank you so much to our 3 guests, Idayat Hassan, Annie Olaloku Teriba and Amaka Anku. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Tom McRae, and the whole team here, bye for now.